If you have ever felt confused by how a narcissist seemed to go from deeply invested in you to cold, dismissive, and emotionally absent, you are not imagining it. The discard phase in a narcissistic relationship rarely happens out of nowhere. Even when it feels sudden, there are almost always signs in the language they use, in the emotional distance they create, and in the way they start rewriting the story of the relationship before they leave. Many people search for answers after the shock of being devalued or abandoned, wondering what changed, what they missed, and whether the person they loved was ever real at all. The painful truth is that narcissists often do not discard you abruptly in the way healthy people end relationships. Instead, they begin emotionally exiting long before the actual break, and they often reveal that process through repeated phrases that prepare the ground for blame, confusion, guilt, and control. Understanding those phrases can help you recognize narcissistic manipulation earlier, protect your mental health, and break free from the cycle of idealization, devaluation, and discard. One of the most disturbing parts of narcissistic abuse is that it makes you doubt your own reality. At the beginning, the narcissist may seem attentive, affectionate, protective, and deeply invested in your life. You may feel seen in a way you never have before. They may text constantly, promise a future, mirror your values, and make you believe that this connection is different from anything you have ever experienced. That intensity can feel like love, but in many narcissistic relationships, it is not intimacy. It is a setup. It is the stage where attachment is built quickly so dependence forms before your boundaries have a chance to fully activate. Once that attachment is secure, the dynamic often changes. The praise becomes criticism. The warmth becomes unpredictability. The closeness becomes distance. The same person who once insisted you were special begins speaking to you as if you are a burden. That shift is not random. It is part of the narcissistic cycle, and their words during this stage often carry a very specific emotional message. When narcissists prepare to discard you, they usually begin by framing you as the problem. This is important because it protects their self-image. A narcissist often cannot tolerate seeing themselves as cruel, selfish, unstable, or emotionally exploitative. So instead of admitting they are withdrawing because they are bored, resentful, ashamed, or chasing a new source of validation, they create a narrative in which you are too demanding, too sensitive, too needy, too emotional, too difficult, or simply not good enough. Their phrases are rarely honest reflections of what happened. They are defensive scripts meant to transfer guilt from them to you. That is why listening carefully to their wording matters. Their statements often tell you less about your worth and more about their need to escape accountability. A common phrase narcissists say before they discard you is, "You are too much to deal with." On the surface, that sentence sounds like exhaustion. It sounds like a person who is overwhelmed and asking for relief. But in the context of narcissistic abuse, it usually means something far more manipulative. What they are often really saying is that your emotional responses are no longer convenient for them. During the early stages, they may have encouraged your vulnerability. They may have told you to open up, trust them, and lean on them. But once they begin devaluing you, your pain becomes irritating to them because it reminds them of the harm they caused. If you are crying because of their lies, questioning because of their inconsistency, or reacting because of their repeated boundary violations, they may suddenly describe you as dramatic, unstable, or exhausting. What they call too much is often just your nervous system responding to prolonged emotional injury. They drained you emotionally, and now that you are showing the effects, they want to make your pain look like your flaw. This phrase is powerful because it plants shame. You start wondering whether you really are too intense, too emotional, or too difficult to love. You begin editing yourself to be easier to handle. You speak less, ask fewer questions, suppress your needs, and try harder not to upset them. That self-abandonment is exactly what keeps the cycle going. A healthy partner may express overwhelm with honesty and compassion, but they will not weaponize your distress against you. They will not injure you and then punish you for bleeding. When a narcissist says you are too much to deal with, pay attention not only to the sentence but to the timing. It often appears after you begin noticing inconsistencies, after you confront disrespect, or after you stop accepting mistreatment quietly. In other words, you become too much the moment you stop being easy to control. Another phrase narcissists often use before the discard phase is, "I need space." In a healthy relationship, needing space can be completely normal. People need time to think, rest, regulate, and reconnect with themselves. The difference is in the double standard. In narcissistic relationships, "I need space" often does not mean healthy self-care. It means selective withdrawal that only applies to them. When you needed space, they may have accused you of abandonment, rejection, distance, selfishness, or not caring enough. They may have chased you, guilt you, or punished you for pulling back. But when they want distance, suddenly it becomes mature, justified, and untouchable. This hypocrisy is one of the clearest signs you are dealing with narcissistic control rather than mutual respect. When a narcissist says they need space before discarding you, what they are often doing is creating emotional ambiguity. They do not want to fully end things yet, because they may still want access to your attention, emotional labor, admiration, body, or backup support. But they also want freedom from accountability and closeness. So they place the relationship in limbo. You are left waiting, analyzing, and hoping while they detach at their own pace. During this period, many people blame themselves. They think maybe they pushed too hard, texted too much, asked for too much reassurance, or became too reactive. But what often drives this withdrawal is not your neediness. It is the narcissist's decreasing investment and growing desire to reposition themselves as the one in control. "I need space" becomes a socially acceptable way to begin abandoning you while still keeping the door open on their terms. You may also hear the phrase, "You have changed." This one is especially cruel because it targets your survival adaptations. Many people do change in narcissistic relationships, but not in the way the narcissist implies. You may become more anxious, more guarded, less trusting, less spontaneous, and more hyper-aware of tone, timing, and emotional temperature. You may stop laughing as freely. You may over-explain. You may become suspicious because you have been lied to. You may become reactive because your boundaries have been crossed so many times that your body no longer feels safe. In that sense, yes, you changed. You changed to survive them. You changed because the relationship required constant vigilance. You changed because the version of you that entered the relationship with openness and innocence was repeatedly punished. When narcissists say, "You have changed," they are usually ignoring their role in that transformation. They present your trauma response as proof that you are the problem, rather than evidence that the relationship has become psychologically damaging. This phrase often appears when your silence turns into questions, when your patience turns into frustration, or when your tolerance turns into boundaries. They want the compliant version of you back, the version that believed their charm and did not challenge their behavior. They do not mourn the loss of intimacy. They mourn the loss of access. The statement also helps them create moral distance from you. If you have changed, then in their mind they are not abandoning a loyal, loving partner. They are simply walking away from someone who became difficult, negative, or incompatible. That story protects them from guilt while leaving you to carry the emotional wreckage. A particularly devastating phrase is, "I never loved you like that." This statement often arrives late in the devaluation process or near the discard itself, and it can feel like an emotional demolition. It is designed to erase the meaning of everything that happened before. All the affectionate messages, the promises, the intensity, the future planning, the vulnerability, the tenderness, and the connection you thought you shared suddenly get recast as misunderstanding. The narcissist may say they were confused, never serious, not that into you, or never felt the depth you believed was there. Sometimes they say it flatly. Sometimes they say it coldly. Sometimes they say it after months or years of behavior that clearly suggested otherwise. That contradiction is the point. They want you disoriented. This phrase serves several functions in narcissistic abuse. First, it rewrites history so they do not have to confront how much they encouraged your attachment. Second, it helps them avoid responsibility for the intimacy they performed. Third, it deepens your pain by making you question your own memory and judgment. If they never loved you like that, then what was real? Were you foolish? Did you imagine the closeness? Did you mean less than you thought? Those questions can keep someone emotionally trapped long after the relationship ends. But it is important to understand that this statement is often less a truthful confession than a final act of control. Narcissists frequently change the meaning of the past based on what serves them in the present. When they wanted access, they acted invested. When they want distance, they deny the investment. Their version of the story shifts to support their emotional convenience. You may also hear, "I cannot do this anymore." Again, there are situations where this phrase can be honest and appropriate. But in narcissistic dynamics, it often disguises a refusal rather than an inability. They could do this anymore. They simply do not want to. They do not want the discomfort of accountability, the effort of repair, the limits that your boundaries now impose, or the emotional labor required to sustain a relationship where they are no longer idealized. That is a crucial distinction. By saying they cannot do this anymore, they frame themselves as emotionally maxed out, wounded, or forced to walk away. It sounds helpless, almost tragic. But many narcissists say this after a long period of giving very little while taking a lot. What they are calling unbearable is often simply the loss of total control. This phrase is also used to shut down conversation. If you try to clarify, they accuse you of pressuring them. If you express hurt, they say you are proving their point. If you ask for honesty, they claim they are too drained to keep talking. Suddenly, the person who created confusion becomes the victim of having to explain themselves. The relationship ends not through mutual truth but through emotional exhaustion. You are left trying to make sense of a sentence that sounds final but explains nothing. Often the hidden message is this: they no longer want to invest in the version of the relationship where your needs matter. They want out, but they want out without carrying the full weight of their choices. Another classic line before discard is, "You will never find someone like me." This sentence reveals the narcissistic mindset more clearly than almost any other. It is not about love. It is about branding. They are trying to remain psychologically dominant even as they withdraw. The goal is to make you fear life after them. They want you to believe that they are rare, unforgettable, superior, and irreplaceable. In some cases, they say this directly. In other cases, they imply it by reminding you how much they did for you, how deeply they understood you, how special your connection was, or how no one else will tolerate you the way they did. It is emotional colonization. Even as they leave, they want to occupy space in your self-worth. The irony is that many survivors later discover that never finding someone like them is exactly the blessing. You do not want another person who love bombs you, confuses you, invalidates you, withholds affection, punishes your needs, and calls the damage they caused your issues. But during the discard phase, the sentence can land hard because it targets the wound the narcissist helped create. After prolonged devaluation, your confidence is often low. You may already feel unlovable, hard to understand, or too damaged for healthy connection. So when they say you will never find someone like them, part of you may panic. That panic is not proof they are right. It is proof the abuse affected your sense of self. Their statement is not a prediction. It is an attempt to preserve power beyond the relationship. There are other phrases that often appear in the same emotional territory. Narcissists may say, "You are impossible to please," when what they mean is that you have started noticing their inconsistency. They may say, "Nothing I do is ever enough for you," after doing the bare minimum or cycling between charm and neglect. They may say, "You are always starting drama," when you are trying to discuss real issues. They may say, "I am tired of defending myself," when they are being asked to answer for behavior that hurt you. They may say, "I do not owe you an explanation," after building intimacy that reasonably created expectations of honesty. They may say, "You are too sensitive," when your reactions expose their cruelty. In each case, the structure is similar. They convert your legitimate experience into a personal defect and use that distortion to justify withdrawal. What makes these words so effective is not just the content but the context. By the time the discard phase begins, you may already be emotionally depleted. You may have spent months trying to restore the closeness you felt at the beginning. You may be clinging to memories of who they were when they were attentive, open, and affectionate. You may still believe that if you can just explain yourself better, react less, support them more, or prove your love more clearly, the connection will stabilize. Narcissists often exploit that hope. They keep you working for what used to be freely given. Their phrases then become hooks that pull you deeper into self-doubt. Instead of asking whether they are treating you with care, you start asking whether you deserve their coldness. That is one of the most dangerous shifts in narcissistic abuse. It is also important to understand why the discard feels so shocking even when the warning signs are there. Trauma bonds distort perception. In a trauma bond, the cycle of reward and pain creates a powerful emotional dependence. Intermittent reinforcement, where affection appears unpredictably, makes the nervous system cling more tightly, not less. You remember the good moments intensely because they become relief from the bad ones. This creates confusion. If someone is consistently cruel, it is easier to leave. But if someone alternates between warmth and withdrawal, apology and blame, closeness and contempt, you stay focused on the possibility of return. That is why narcissists do not always need to keep you happy. They only need to keep you uncertain. Uncertainty keeps you engaged. The discard phase often begins when one of several things happens. You may start asking sharper questions. You may stop idealizing them. You may no longer provide the same supply of admiration, attention, or compliance. They may become interested in someone new. They may feel exposed by your awareness. They may resent your emotional needs because they now interfere with the image or freedom they want. In each of these situations, the narcissist begins loosening their emotional connection while simultaneously laying the groundwork to blame you for the shift. Their language becomes colder, flatter, and more dismissive. They may stop reassuring you. They may respond later or less. They may become irritated by ordinary requests. They may turn every conversation into an indictment of your character. The words change before the official ending arrives. One reason survivors struggle so much after discard is because they are trying to decode language that was never meant to clarify. Narcissistic phrases are often strategic, not relational. They are chosen not to resolve but to control. That means trying to interpret them as good faith communication can keep you stuck. For example, when a narcissist says, "You are too much to deal with," your instinct may be to become less demanding. When they say, "I need space," you may try to become more patient. When they say, "You have changed," you may try to become softer again. When they say, "I cannot do this anymore," you may try to save the relationship. But these responses often deepen the imbalance because they assume mutuality where there is manipulation. The healthier question is not, "How do I fix what they are saying?" but, "What pattern is this sentence revealing?" That pattern is usually one of emotional disinvestment combined with blame shifting. Instead of honestly saying, "I no longer want to be in this relationship, and I know my behavior contributed to the damage," the narcissist externalizes responsibility. They act as if your hurt appeared in a vacuum. They speak as if your mistrust is irrational, your pain is excessive, and your requests for accountability are attacks. This is one reason narcissistic discard can feel more like psychological punishment than a breakup. It is not just that they leave. It is that they leave while trying to define you as the reason they had to. They want the ending to preserve their ego, not your dignity. Many survivors ask whether narcissists know what they are doing when they say these things. The answer can vary. Some are highly conscious and calculating. Others operate from such entrenched defensiveness that they may believe their own narrative in the moment. But regardless of their level of awareness, the impact on you is real. You do not have to prove intent to acknowledge harm. If someone repeatedly twists your reality, minimizes your pain, withholds empathy, and positions your emotional reaction as evidence against you, the relationship is unsafe. Whether their manipulation is coldly strategic or reflexively defensive, your nervous system still pays the price. The emotional cost of these phrases often lingers long after the relationship ends. You may find yourself hearing their words in your own head. You may worry you are too much, too sensitive, too changed, too broken, too hard to love. You may feel ashamed of how much the discard affected you. You may compare yourself to whoever they moved on to next. You may obsess over what was real. This is where healing begins with language too. You have to consciously replace their narrative with truth. "You are too much to deal with" becomes "My needs became inconvenient for someone who wanted access without accountability." "I need space" becomes "They wanted distance without honesty." "You have changed" becomes "I adapted to an unhealthy environment." "I never loved you like that" becomes "They are rewriting history to avoid responsibility." "I cannot do this anymore" becomes "They do not want the work of mutual care." "You will never find someone like me" becomes "I hope I never do." Healing after narcissistic discard often requires grief on several levels. You are not only grieving the person. You are grieving the future you imagined, the version of yourself that hoped, the time you lost, and the reality you thought you were living in. You may also be grieving the humiliation of being treated as disposable after investing so deeply. That pain can make people crave closure from the very person who wounded them. But narcissists rarely provide genuine closure because closure requires empathy, accountability, and stable truth. What they tend to offer instead is more confusion, more revision, more defensiveness, or occasional hoovering designed to pull you back in. Real closure often has to come from understanding the pattern, not from receiving the perfect final conversation. This is why education about narcissistic abuse matters so much. When you can identify these common phrases and their hidden meanings, the relationship begins to look different. The confusion starts to loosen. You stop treating every hurtful sentence as a deep truth about you and start seeing it as part of a predictable cycle. This does not erase the pain, but it changes your position inside it. Instead of being a defendant in their case against you, you become a witness to the pattern. That shift is powerful. Witnessing is the beginning of freedom. It is also important to say that not every difficult breakup involves narcissism. People can be immature, avoidant, inconsistent, or emotionally unavailable without meeting the clinical or behavioral profile of narcissistic abuse. The reason these phrases matter is not because any single sentence proves someone is a narcissist, but because repeated use of these phrases within a larger pattern of idealization, gaslighting, devaluation, entitlement, lack of empathy, blame shifting, and emotional exploitation is highly significant. Context matters. Pattern matters. Impact matters. If you are constantly left confused, walking on eggshells, apologizing for your pain, and trying to earn basic respect, that is not a healthy relationship. The body often knows before the mind fully accepts it. Before the discard becomes official, you may notice a constant state of tension. You check your phone obsessively. You replay conversations. You dread bringing things up because you know it will turn into blame. You feel relief when they are kind and fear when they are cold. You become highly attuned to small signals because the emotional climate changes without warning. These are not signs that you are irrational. They are signs that the relationship has become unsafe enough that your nervous system is scanning for harm. Narcissistic language works because it enters a body already primed by inconsistency. That is why the phrases can feel so powerful. They do not land in a vacuum. They land in a system that has been conditioned to question itself. If you are currently hearing these phrases in your relationship, it may help to stop focusing only on the literal wording and start tracking behavior. Are they becoming less accountable? Less empathetic? More irritated by your basic needs? More invested in portraying you as the problem? More evasive, withholding, or contradictory? Are they using your reactions to avoid discussing what caused them? Are they creating distance while still expecting access? Are they treating the history of your relationship as something they can redefine whenever it serves them? These questions often reveal more than the phrases themselves. One of the hardest realities to accept is that the narcissist may move on quickly, appear happy, or even act as if the relationship never mattered. This can intensify the wound of discard. You may feel erased. But surface ease does not equal emotional health. Narcissists often rely on new supply, distraction, image management, and narrative control to avoid sitting with the discomfort of what they have done. Their apparent indifference is not proof that you were worthless. It is often proof that they cope through detachment, denial, and replacement. Your depth of pain is not evidence that they were the stronger one. It is often evidence that you were the one who bonded, cared, and hoped in good faith. There is also a reason these phrases can sound strangely familiar across many survivor stories. Narcissistic relationships tend to follow recognizable patterns because the underlying dynamics are similar. The wording may vary slightly, but the emotional intent is consistent. The narcissist wants to exit without being the villain, maintain superiority, avoid accountability, and leave you unsure enough to keep doubting yourself. That is why so many people report the same kinds of statements: you are too much, too sensitive, too changed, too demanding, too dramatic, too hard to love. These labels are not objective assessments. They are instruments of devaluation. As you heal, one of the most transformative things you can do is reclaim the parts of yourself their words tried to shame. If they said you were too much, reclaim your depth. If they said you changed, honor the self that adapted to survive. If they said you were too sensitive, reclaim your capacity to feel and notice what others ignore. If they said nobody would love you like they did, redefine love entirely. Love is not confusion, fear, inconsistency, and emotional scarcity dressed up as intensity. Love is safety, truth, truth, reciprocity, repair, and respect. The more clearly you define love, the less persuasive their counterfeit version becomes. Recovery may involve no contact, therapy, support groups, journaling, education, spiritual grounding, trauma-informed healing, and time. It may involve mourning someone who never fully existed in the way you believed they did. It may involve accepting that the beginning of the relationship was not a promise of what could return but a strategy that made the later cruelty harder to understand. That acceptance can be painful, but it is also liberating. Once you stop waiting for the idealized version of them to come back, you can start turning toward yourself with compassion instead of criticism. Many survivors also discover that the discard was not the end of manipulation. Some narcissists return later with apologies, nostalgia, flirtation, crisis, or sudden vulnerability. This is often called hoovering. They may say they miss you, they made a mistake, no one understands them like you do, or they finally see your value. If you have not fully processed the earlier phrases, hoovering can reopen the trauma bond quickly. That is why understanding the language of discard matters so much. It helps you recognize that the relationship was not broken by your insufficiency but by a pattern of emotional exploitation. Without that clarity, a moment of longing can be mistaken for a second chance. The phrase, "you are too much to deal with," loses its power when you realize healthy love does not require you to become smaller. "I need space" loses its confusion when you recognize that mutual respect does not operate by double standards. "You have changed" loses its shame when you understand that trauma changes people, and healing can change them again. "I never loved you like that" loses its ability to erase the past when you remember that someone else's revisionism does not invalidate your lived experience. "I cannot do this anymore" loses its martyrdom when you see that unwillingness is not the same as incapacity. "You will never find someone like me" loses its threat when you understand that peace is better than intensity without safety. If this article feels painfully familiar, that does not mean you are weak. It means you are recognizing patterns that were designed to keep you confused. Awareness can feel brutal at first because it removes false hope, but it also restores your reality. And reality is where healing begins. The more clearly you can name what happened, the less power those phrases have over your future. You stop seeing yourself through the lens they handed you and start seeing the relationship for what it was. Not a reflection of your worth, but a pattern of manipulation that left wounds you are now allowed to tend with honesty and care. The truth is that narcissists often do show you they are leading before they leave. It appears in their demeanor, their distance, their coldness, their irritation, their shifting tone, and their repeated efforts to paint your pain as the problem. The words are clues. They are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are subtle. Sometimes they sound mature on the surface. But when they appear inside a relationship defined by inconsistency, blame, entitlement, and emotional exploitation, they take on a very different meaning. They become part of the script that prepares you for discard while protecting the narcissist's ego. You deserved honesty instead of ambiguity. You deserved empathy instead of contempt. You deserved repair instead of reversal. You deserved a relationship where your needs were not treated as offenses and your reactions were not used to discredit your reality. If someone discarded you after slowly convincing you that your pain made you difficult, remember this: being wounded by mistreatment does not make you the problem. Being changed by survival does not make you unlovable. And being left by a narcissist does not mean you lost something healthy. Very often, it means you survived something harmful. In the end, the most important shift is this: stop asking why a narcissist said those words and start asking what those words were trying to do. Were they minimizing you, blaming you, erasing the past, avoiding accountability, asserting superiority, or preparing their exit? Once you answer that honestly, the fog begins to lift. Their language stops functioning as a verdict on your value and starts revealing their pattern of control. That is how you begin to take your mind back. That is how you begin to heal. That is how the phrases that once shattered you become evidence, not prophecy. And perhaps that is the deepest form of recovery. Not merely surviving the discard, but reaching a point where the very words that once made you question everything now help you trust yourself more. You hear "you are too much," and you think, "No, I was asking for healthy love." You hear "I need space," and you think, "No, you wanted distance without responsibility." You hear "you have changed," and you think, "Yes, pain changed me, but healing will too." You hear "I never loved you like that," and you think, "Your inability to sustain truth does not erase what I experienced." You hear "I cannot do this anymore," and you think, "Mutual care was never what you wanted." You hear "You will never find someone like me," and you think, "That is exactly the hope." That hope matters. It is not naive. It is grounded. It is the hope of building a life where love does not require confusion, where intimacy does not punish vulnerability, where conflict does not become character assassination, and where endings do not require one person to destroy the other's reality in order to leave. That kind of love exists, but even before it arrives, peace exists. Clarity exists. Self-trust exists. The life after narcissistic abuse is not just about finding someone better. It is about becoming unreachable to the kind of language that once made you abandon yourself. So if you are standing in the aftermath of narcissistic discard, replaying their words and wondering whether they were right, let this be the truth you return to. Their phrases were often strategies, not truths. Their withdrawal was often about their patterns, not your worth. Their coldness was often a defense, not a verdict. And your pain is not proof that you were too much. It is proof that something harmful touched someone capable of deep attachment and real love. With time, support, and clarity, that capacity does not disappear. It becomes wiser. It becomes better protected. And one day, the words that once broke you will no longer define you at all.